Good evening and welcome to Ancestor House. My name is Dami Akinnusi. I'm a broadcast journalist and filmmaker at Darkling Productions, but tonight I am your host. So come on in and take a seat. I'm very happy to have you. Now, this evening's show harps back to the UK and finds a connection with Africans and who we are in the diaspora. It's all about Black History Walks. We have with us a UK historian in from London, Tony Warner, who not only is the director of Black History Walks, but they also do walks, talks and films. And it's all about how do we engage with our history, and is Black history world history? Isn't it just our collective history? And really, when it comes to the UK and especially London, when we think about Black history, we never usually think that London is riddled with the stories and a narrative of a slave generation and more. But tonight on this show, we have the ins and outs from Tony Warner, the UK historian, with Black History Walks, as we engage with our history for all, because it's world history. So come on in, Ancestor House, pull up a seat and enjoy Nana Camille Yarborough's creation. Welcome.
I'm so glad we are family. I want to shout we are family and tell the world we are family and show the world we are family. Take my hand, brother, we are family. You help me, I'll help you stand. We are family. It's a gift from God. We are family. We're so blessed, we are family. We're the people of Africa. We're the African family. Family home.
Welcome. This is Ancestor House. I am your host, Dami Akinnusi, and I'm really excited to be with you today because we have someone in from the UK, Tony Warner. We're going to kick off the show because it's all about Black history and how we look at Black history and through what lens we observe it, you know, and is it really just world history? And especially when, you know, personally, when I think of Black history, you know, there's so many stories that come out of America, so many people who really contributed to the struggle, and especially growing up, we didn't really experience, you know, what London had to offer in terms of the contributions that Africans and the descendants of Africans in the diaspora had contributed. And in fact, you know, the legacy of who they were as people who actually lived in Europe way before even slavery. So tonight's show is all about that. So we're going to kick off first of all with one of the pieces that Tony Browder, UK historian, has come up with, and it's all about it's Black Britons basically, and that's where we'll start. Black Britons. I am one of those. I'm also a Nigerian, but I'm a Black Briton here in New York. So let's start off with that first piece, Black Britons. Take it away.
Many people believe that the first black people to arrive in Britain were slaves or servants. However, if you look through British history, there's evidence of influential African and Caribbean people back through the centuries.
I'm going to read you a quote from a letter from Queen Elizabeth I in the year 1596. The letter was sent to Lord Mayor of London and to other mayors and sheriffs of different towns in England. It goes like this. Her Majesty, understanding that several blackamoors have lately been brought into this realm, of which kind of people there are already too many here, Her Majesty's pleasure, therefore, is that those kind of people should be expelled from the land, and for that purpose, instruction is given to the bearer, Edward Baines, to take 10 of these blackamoors that were brought into this realm by Sir Thomas Baskerville on his last voyage and transport them out of the realm. So what does this tell you about blackamoors and their presence in England at this time?
One of the earliest recorded images of an African in Britain is a black trumpeter depicted on the Westminster tournament roll of 1511. This musician was probably from North Africa and was employed by both Henry VII and Henry VIII.
In 1601, Elizabeth I issued a proclamation in which she declared herself highly discontented to understand the great numbers of negars and blackamoors which are crept into this realm, who are fostered and relieved, or fed, here to the great annoyance of our own liege people, that want the food which those people are consuming, as also for that the most of them are infidels, having no understanding of Christ or his gospel.
By the late 16th century, trade had opened up between West Africa and Britain, and Africans began to settle in Britain, becoming part of the population, especially in seafaring places like Bristol, London, Liverpool and Glasgow. Black men and women made appearances in the diaries of Samuel Pepys and in 18th century portraits. Black sailors are recorded serving with Captain Cook on the Endeavour in 1768, and it's the seafaring Africans and Caribbeans who begin to feature in political and public arenas, often in the fight against slavery.
Alauda Equiano was a sailor. In the year 1789, he actually wrote a book about his experiences and then toured the country giving lectures on the evils of slavery.
Jamaican sailor William Davidson became a radical political leader in the wake of the Peterloo Massacre in Manchester in 1812. He was a member of the radical group caught trying to overthrow the government in what was known as the Cato Street Conspiracy.
Unfortunately for him, there was a police informant in the ranks. So for his troubles, in the year 1820, he was hung first, then had his head chopped off at Newgate Prison, now known as the Old Bailey.
Can you find the names and pictures of other prominent Black Britons of the 17th and 18th century?
Hello and welcome once again to Ancestor House. What a great start to the show, Black Britons, and that was Tony Warner himself. And now you're going to meet him on the show inside our wonderful abode called Ancestor House. Welcome, Tony Warner from London, the UK. Well, you're not actually from London, are you? Really?
Oh, I was born there, so I am in a way.
Yeah, you were born there, and then, well, just explain the accent so people.
Well, I was born in London. I grew up in a place called Yorkshire, which is about 200 miles north of London, and it has a different accent to London people. And then I lived in the Caribbean, and then I came back to London, so lots of different accents. Barbados and St. Lucia, to be precise.
So, what, St. Lucia?
And Barbados.
Oh, okay, so Barbados and... Barbados, yes, I have roots in Barbados now. So this is... and that's the thing about, when we speak about the UK, first of all, that it's not just London, which when I meet a lot of people here, like, London, that's it. Yeah. But it's, you know, and we're everywhere as well as people of colour. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming. So now, just to introduce, in fact, let you introduce yourself. We just saw you there on this great piece, obviously, about the Black history of the UK. Tell us a little bit about your organisation, Black History Walks, and why you set it up.
Okay, I run a group called Black History Walks, and we run walking tours in London, but we also put on films and talks and presentations as well. And the reason I organised these walking tours in London is because I'd done about 6-7 different London tours. Because if you come to London as a tourist, there's a whole bunch of tours. You can do a Jack the Ripper tour, Beatles tour, a Ghost tour, Underground tour, all sorts of these different tours, right? But if you go on them, there's hardly any mention of any Black people whatsoever. So I went on one walk and they mentioned Martin Luther King, and that was it. That was it, and that's because there's a statue of him above Westminster Abbey. But other than that, there was no mention of the kind of African presence there. So I thought this can't be right. Yeah. So I actually set up my own walk about, what was it, 6-7 years ago now?
Oh, really? 6-7 years ago? Cool. So I feel like I've known you then a long time, because you've been doing the screenings
Films,
as well, which a lot of them have been happening at the British Film Institute.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know, and what was really interesting and what I really liked about it as well is that, I mean, we have our Black History Month in October, and usually that's the time when anything to do with Black history or Black film, and especially films coming over from America or anything that have people of colour in, you know, all get fitted into that month. So, you know, seeing yours out of season, it's like, what's going on? What, you know, is this some sort of really special occasion?
We made a point to actually make sure we had films of African Caribbean interest every single month of the year, not just in October, because our history is much longer than just 1 month, and it's unfair to kind of squeeze into 1 month and then that's it for the rest of the year. So we made a conscious effort to actually have them in January, February, March, etc. And the reason we have these films on is to kind of give people access to their history via a visual medium, because that's how quite often people pick up their news, their information about the world, and their news about, you know, what's happening in the world. So we made an effort to actually have these films on a regular basis, and we use sometimes big massive cinemas like the BFI, the British Film Institute, or sometimes we use like a library or a college lecture theatre, or just a community hall, because the whole point is to actually get the films to the population so they can see them, learn from them, and be inspired by them.
Exactly. So when we think about tours, like you said, Jack the Ripper, I remember doing all, you know, all that type of stuff, and yeah, it wasn't even like I perceived that, oh, you know, we're not getting any Black history. I just didn't, you know, I wasn't really thinking there was any. So now when you do the tours, I mean, when we saw in this first video, but where, you know, what is it that, or where is it that you would take someone, or what's the journey when you think about London in the context of, you know, African history?
Well, there's actually 4 Black History Walks that I run. You've got one in Trafalgar Square, one in Notting Hill, Elephant Castle, and the oldest one is in a place called St. Paul's Bank. Okay. And what we do in those walks is for about 2 hours or so, we walk around a small area, and then we pull out all the kind of African history that's in the streets, the buildings, and the architecture, because there's lots of it there if you know what to look for. So, for example, there's evidence of African architecture going back 2,000 years in London. There's evidence
of African architecture when you mean like Africans who lived there, or Africans who
Africans who lived there, because, for example, like when people think about the Black presence in the UK, they think about slavery, maybe, and then they think about the Windrush 1948. Well, actually, it goes back to Roman times, because when the Romans came there 2,000 years ago, there were African people in the Roman Empire. So the African people came from North Africa via Italy to England, and you had an African Roman emperor called Septimus Severus. You had a whole bunch of Septimus Severus.
So I think with your, you know, the northern accent, you have to speak
Septimus
a bit slower. Because even me, I'm like, I haven't heard like, you know, someone from Yorkshire for like a while. I'm like just adjusting again. So I'm sure our audience, like, I get told all the time I speak really fast. So I know you're speaking faster than me.
So you had Septimus Severus, who was an African Roman emperor, actually ruled Rome from England. He actually died in York in 211 AD. So this is an African man who was ruling the whole of the Roman Empire.
In 211 AD.
Yeah, you had African soldiers, African sailors, African business people going back 2,000 years in the UK. And apart from that, one of the most kind of significant icons in London is what we call Cleopatra's Needle, which is on the north bank of the River Thames. So if you go to the, you know, that big wheel, the London Eye, opposite that there's this massive obelisk, right? And here, think about this, is that London is only 2,000 years old. So when the Romans came 2,000 years ago, they established Londinium. We call it London now. But this obelisk,
what when it first came? When they first came, they called it.
They call it Londinium. That was the Roman word for London. Yeah, and we shortened it to London.
Okay,
but
Londinium.
Before 2,000 years ago, there was no such thing as London. So the Romans established London, and that's, so London is roughly 2,000 years old. The obelisk that was found in Africa and brought to London. Oh,
it's actually, they've actually transported the obelisk.
They nicked it. Oh, sorry, nicked. it was what's that word? Liberated. They probably said liberated, right? Or it was a gift, as they might say.
It was gifted to
this obelisk was built in Africa, made by African people, and this obelisk is 3,500 years old. And that's an example of the kind of African history that's literally on display in London that you can all see, but people will look at it and not even recognize it's of African descent, because that's where it came from. It was built in Africa by African people 3,500 years ago, which is to say it was built 1,500 years before London even existed, and yet the entry for most people in England when it comes to Black history is slavery. So that kind of shows you how far back the African history goes and how people have been misinformed for quite a long time.
And this is amazing because we're just about to show, you know, the second video, which is about obelisk.
Oh, right.
The obelisk.
Cool.
Which is yours, and so people can see, you know, especially being from here.
Yeah.
You know, just like a bit of the landscape.
Because there's an American connection as well. That obelisk connects to America. It connects to your capital city, even.
Oh, because that was made here, though, right? The Washington.
The one that was that was made here. That was made here. But you can see where they got the idea from. That's the whole point.
Yeah, that's so interesting. But what you said about education is that, you know, without, you know, you'd look at it and without knowing that there's any type of reference or heritage, how would you even think that, oh, this is something, you know, my ancestors created?
Absolutely.
You know, you just be like, oh, look, there's an obelisk. You know, I've seen that in Egypt, basically, in Egyptology and everything, whatever. So, okay, so let's show that. Are we ready with that one? This one is part 2, and it's the obelisk, or part 4, and it's called the obelisk. So. Do we have that? Yes. You said it was for the History Channel or the...
Teach.
I've been on many guided history tours. You'll find them in most of the big towns and cities in Britain. But have you noticed they rarely mention any black people or their place in British history? If you take a walk around your nearest town or city, you can find clues to the local black history, often in the names of the oldest shops, cafes, or even the streets. You'll find the contribution of black people to British history and society goes back centuries.
The influence is everywhere. It's all around you, in the streets, the buildings, the architecture. But people walk past it every single day and don't even notice it. But the fact is, it's all around you if you know where to look.
Where's the African influence in this quiet English square? It's something you'll find in many village greens, cemeteries, and at war memorials. It's got ancient spiritual significance, and it's of African design.
And it's this thing right here.
You can find imitation obelisks like this one all around Britain, most often in key locations that hold a particular significance. The original obelisks date back thousands of years to Africa, where they were placed outside temples, probably as symbols of rebirth. So it's interesting that they now commonly appear in cemeteries, and in particular as war memorials. In 1963, Martin Luther King gave his inspiring "I Have a Dream" speech in front of an imitation obelisk called the Washington Monument.
This obelisk is referred to as Cleopatra's Needle, although it was built long before she was even born. It's 21 meters tall, it weighs 180 tons, and is carved out of solid rock 3,500 years ago. Here's a question. How old is London? London's roughly 2,000 years old. So it means that people in Africa were capable of producing things like this, using their art, science, technology, 1,500 years before London even existed.
Isn't that so great? Like, it has such a rich history, and you know, it's such a blessing actually to find these gems, especially because knowing I've walked past things every single day, and up into a point of being made aware that, oh wow, and it's really empowering. So I really love that you know you're doing this, and you know, that leads me into, like, okay, so you know, there's this idea that, you know, it's all in the past, so why do we need to connect with history anyway? So, you know, kind of, who cares that, okay, fine, our ancestors built that, but it's just an obelisk, it's there, whatever. So what's the you know,
what's the point?
Yeah, what's the point?
Well, the point is to kind of to recognize your true history. I mean, especially if I talk from a UK perspective, if you go to school as a little black kid and all you're taught is that you were a slave, you were a slave, you were a slave, and that was it, and then it was like Martin Luther King, then that's not your full history, so it's incorrect in the first place. But also, I mean, you just think about those people in Africa, and I'm not just talking about North Africa, because you had civilizations in North, East, South and West, as we explained on the walk. Those people created that, and that legacy is right there, and for it not to be recognized is a disservice to their intellect and their achievement. And also, it's like, why is it such a kind of a secret? Because that obelisk is in the middle of London, right? If you go to Paris, there's one that was taken from Africa in the middle of Paris. If you go to Rome, there's about 13 that were taken from Africa. So on the one hand, you hear that Africa has no art, no civilization, no art, no culture. On the other hand, you go to these European capitals, and all of them have liberated, borrowed, or nicked stuff from this African continent and use it to represent art and culture. And if you go to Washington, D.C., actually, if you go to their website, because the Washington Monument has a website, and it will tell you blatantly that the obelisk there was designed based on the Egyptian obelisk. So if Africa is so backward and undesirable, why is it always being imitated and borrowed with regard to its history and culture?
Well, and that's a good question. Why is it, you know, always being imitated, and, you know, why things being borrowed? And but the thing is as well, Egypt, and I remember being told repeatedly that Egypt is, you know, in the Middle East, and, you know, I myself know it's in Africa because of how I've been taught. Like, and but you know, there's been so much different, you know, in terms of like there is. It's an open who really. I mean, it's depending on if you're watching this show or whether you're watching like a BBC News show. It depends on where Egypt is.
I've been to a primary school in London, and I did the same sort of presentation. I talked about how the obelisk is from Africa, and Africa is in Egypt. And I went to the staff room afterwards, and all the teachers there, well, all the teachers, not all the teachers were there. There's one teacher was there. She said, "I'm so glad you came, because I never realized that Egypt was in Africa." And she was a teacher of primary school children. I'm thinking, wow, you're teaching my kids, and you don't even know where Egypt is. But let's forget Egypt for a while. There was another picture in that little clip you showed there of an obelisk in Ethiopia, which is even further down the river now, or further down the African continent. So you can find these evidence of African civilization, North, East, South, West, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Ghana. It's all across the entire continent. But unless you are reminded or told or informed, then you might have this idea that Africa is a great big massive jungle and nothing happened there, which is completely inaccurate.
So this, you know, seems like one of the things that inspired you to go on this journey. But you know, I see that you really engage. I mean, and especially because I just think about, I think it was back in 2011 with the Images of Black Women Film Festival. It's an amazing festival, by the way. Darkling Productions is one of the partners, and you know, we're now in the 9th year, and it's actually one of now like the only film festival in the UK that recognises, you know, women of colour and tries to bring their works to the forefront, and we really support films from all over the world. But you had, I hosted the Q&A of an animation forum that you put together, and it was all about the you know, the black superheroes, and it was just really amazing because, you know, had this animation. I remember I forget his name, Naru or something, but he was from Nigeria. He had the African superhero, and it was just it was so great because really the discussion that we were having in that Q&A and that the audience was really engaged with was this idea of, you know, being a child and growing up and seeing images that don't reflect you, and all the superheroes being
white guys.
White guys. I mean, I remember just like, you know, Wonder Woman. I was like, I'm Wonder Woman, whatever. And you know, I wasn't paying attention to the color of her skin. I just wanted to be Wonder Woman. But then, you know, you grow up and it's like, you know, who do you aspire to be? And then it's like, oh. So it was really refreshing to see that. And then, you know, for people to actually have that consideration that, hey, wait, actually it does, you know, make an impression on young people, the images that they see repeatedly on the TV, and especially the ones which are fighting to save the world and are the saviors and the heroes, right? So, you know, and that's, back to, you know, that was just kind of interjection, but back to what, you know, the question was in terms of like, you know, what your inspiration was and the fact that you engage with young people, bringing them history through different mediums.
I mean, all the things that we see affect our self-esteem. So when it comes to straightforward history, it's going to affect your self-esteem. If you just know about sort of images on the big screen like movies and stuff, that also affects your self-esteem. And the thing about why history is so important is to kind of give people that true history. First of all, it's just a fact, it's truth. Tell them the truth about the history, but also because it does affect your self-esteem. And if you're hearing this negative information over and over again, it might give you low self-esteem. But if you're never hearing the true story about African people, it might give you a certain view of them if you're not African yourself. So it works in both directions. And when it comes to, again, superheroes now, again, you know, superheroes are the thing at the last 5 years. There's been a whole bunch of superhero films, and the question is, well, where are all the black guys? Where are all the black women, for that matter? And again, there's no reason why you can't make, or there shouldn't be, some African superheroes on the big screen saving the world like everyone else. Because if you don't see that, that might also affect your self-esteem.
Right. Yeah. And it seems really obvious, right? But then, you know, why do we put up with, you know, this kind of very unequal balance? But is it because there is no opportunity to have the films that represent us on the screen? And that's another thing. You bring films into the UK, and I know that, you know, it's one of the reasons why you're in America as well. You know, sourcing films that you're able to, you know, bring to the screens, and that I remember myself even being there. You know, just in terms of, you know, any time like a film that was released in America, probably like a month or two before, finally got to have a premiere, and usually with the director or whatever, it would be like sold out within, you know, and would all be there, like at Bricks and Ritzy or whatever, and you know, and it's just like a really huge occasion. But why is it that the films that are really a big box office success over here, and African American films, don't seem to reach the UK in any form, shape or way that help us kind of see our rich story and heritage?
I can speak to that a little bit, because there's a film that you had here called Jump in the Broom, and Jump in the Broom was a romantic comedy. It was like in the top 5 in the American box office when it came out, and normally if a film is in the top 10 in America, it gets to England within like 2 weeks, a month at the most, right? Okay. But that film never got there. It never was released. No, it never was released in the UK, right? So I actually showed it, and it was a huge, because people are hungry to see people look like them on a big screen, because it's natural. When you when you go and watch these kind of movies, you want to see people who look like you. It's not unnatural to want to have to see that. So we put it on. We had a kind of a big crowd for it. But anytime you find, in fact, anytime you find positive, accurate portrayals of African people on the big screen, you tend to find that they don't get the same kind of distribution or push that the other films would get. So we'll get a whole bunch of, we'll get a whole bunch of stuff in England which is not very positive and not very kind of uplifting. Right. But when it, I can mention a film called 50 Cent Get Rich or Die Trying. That came across, but films like Jump in the Broom didn't come across. So you have this, even Red Tails had a problem, because Red Tails came out in what, January over here, and it was in the top 5 in the first couple of weeks or so, and that film took 6 months to get to England. And that was a film, you know, funded by George Lucas with a whole bunch of, you know, stars in it. But that film didn't get released in the UK until 6 months, and it never got released in Europe, even though in the film they're actually fighting to save Europe. So it's like, how does that even work?
Oh, wow.
So there's like an obstacle there when it comes to images of positive, progressive black people on the big screen. There's a lack of interest in displaying these films in Europe itself, and in England and London in particular.
And, you know, and I hear a lot, and especially I remember speaking to when they made Fruitvale, the producers, it's Forrest Whitaker and his team, and they were saying how basically even pushing, you know, even with them, you know, this is Forrest Whitaker, right? And it's like having the same debaters or
Great Debaters, that was another one as well. That's Great Debaters of produced by Oprah Winfrey, starring Forrest Whitaker and Denzel Washington, 2 A-list stars, that never got released in the UK. It didn't get released until I showed it. So that kind of shows you how much resistance there is to 2 A-list Hollywood black stars in a positive, true story that can't get over, but you will get Big Mama's House on 50 million screens in the UK. So it's like, what's going on? Yeah,
but what seriously, what is going on? And you know, you need, you know, people to galvanize around you to be able to, you know, penetrate really, because it's, you know, and it's great what you're doing, and I'm so happy that, you know, the expansion that you've made over the years and everything, but it's, you know, it's still just frustrating to ask that question, like, what is going on? Because it's not even like, you know, oh, well, there's only, you know, less than 1% people of color in the UK, so therefore there's no audience for it. Because it's like, we're talking about mainstream films, like, you know, if there's a film and it has Will Smith in it or has Oprah in it or whatever, they're not seen as black people, they're just stars, right? You know, it's that whole, you know, they're bankable in that sense. So where are those positive films? And people, I mean, and the UK is really influential as well in terms of the creative expression, and, you know, so much we feed, and so it makes sense, and especially as the allies, you know, why don't we get a look in? But we get a look in for every other area of popular culture, but somehow are we just excluded, or is it really that they feel that there really is no market?
No, there is a market, and
And you proved there's a market because you're doing it.
Yeah, and there was another film. What was it called now? That one with that little short guy, he's a comedian. Not Kevin. Keith.
Oh, Kevin Hart.
Kevin Hart, yeah.
Yeah, like what's it called?
Think Like Lady Act Like Hunt. Now that actually was brought over to the UK.
Documentary.
Yeah, it was not the documentary. The
one before.
The romantic comedy. Think Like a Lady Act Like a Man. Right?
Yeah.
He was in that. That actually did get to the UK. It didn't have kind of much publicity, much kind of promotion, whatever. But it was selling out cinemas. Just from the word of mouth about this particular film, it was selling out cinemas, and it did quite well on the box office. So there's a market there, but it's not served. So what we try and do is create our own kind of distribution, or our own kind of network to actually put these films on. And we've shown films that have sold out a 400-seat cinema on the Saturday before Christmas, which is unheard of. Like normally you don't ever have that. And it was also there we had a massive snowstorm and you couldn't even get out of your house. Oh, but we sold out this cinema for 400 people, right? So there's a market there. It's underserved, but what we try and do is actually put these films on using our own resources, our own money, and our own kind of networks. Because if you wait for the mainstream to do it, you'll never get it, or you get it once in the blue moon.
And it makes me think of when, you know, it's like 30 years ago, isn't it, I think, but with Julie Dash's film Daughter of the Dust, a similar, when she talks about the story of how people just, you know, blocks and blocks of people in, you know, in the snow or whatever, waiting, you know, to you know, come and like and see this film because they're like starved of like we just want to see something, please, like something refreshing. Or I mean, not to say that, you know, you want to go and escape and see something frivolous or whatever, but it's like when there's no balance, it's like okay, I can only see everything this, and you know you have to like
drug dealers, hoodies, unwed mothers, council estates, or projects as you call them. That ratchet, ratchet. That's what you call it. A ratchet. Anything ratchet, no problem. Anything uplifting, positive, not quite sure about that. As far as the UK is concerned, but we have to kind of get around that by doing our own thing.
Yeah, and that's what's cool, that you're doing your own thing. And you know, speaking of doing your own thing, you know, that independent thing, you know, partly it's about reaching out to people through social media. How can people find you, and especially going back to the UK, people in America? You obviously, you know, it's global now, so you know. Well,
we have a website, and the website's called blackhistorywalks.co.uk. So it's just blackhistorywalks.co.uk.
blackhistorywalks.co.uk.
Yeah. Then we have a YouTube channel, because what I found is that people would come to events and want more information. They'd want more kind of resources, and also a lot of teachers will come to our events, and they also want to find things where they can use in the classroom.
And they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to use this information on top of their
curriculum.
I mean,
like the videos you showed just now, they were made by a company called Teachers TV, and that's actually designed for schools. So on our YouTube channel, it has about 110 videos or so, and they're all relevant to kind of African, Caribbean, British history. So it's fairly kind of unusual and unique, but you can go to that channel and you can find about 100 videos which will help you as far as kind of understanding more about the whole history and presence of black people in the world history. So then you got a Twitter, which is, the Twitter is Black Hist Walker, BLACKHIST Walker. And then we have a Facebook page as well. So Facebook page is just Black History Walks Facebook page.
Black History Walks. Yeah. So they can find you in all of those places, see all the different videos and everything. And in fact, thank you so much for sharing videos, because we're going to see the next one, which is coffee houses and the slave trade, which is really, really interesting. It's like about the whole triangular trade, and you know, and that's when you realize about slavery and it all being about economics. It's all about the bottom line, you know. It's just like completely about like how do we set up a system where we can just profit basically. And so you can kind of understand why they wouldn't have wanted to let that go until it became unprofitable.
Yeah, and what we do in the Walks is we connect that history to people's everyday experience. So it's like, who's not drunk a cup of coffee? And when you have your coffee, right, what do you put in to make it taste sweet? Sugar. Where's the sugar coming from? They came from the Caribbean. So you have all these kind of economic things interlocking, and the center of that trade at one time was the UK. The city of London, the St. Paul's Bank area, that's where a lot of these deals were made. I could talk about chocolate, because how do you make chocolate? You make chocolate with cocoa and sugar. Sugar from the Caribbean. Where's the cocoa coming from? It's coming from Ghana, Ivory Coast. So all that stuff is black history as well. It's literally in your mouth, far less in your face. It's right there in your breakfast table, on your breakfast table.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you say it, and how when you think about Africans who are sourcing this cocoa and never ever getting to try a chocolate bar ever, you know, and yet they're working and struggling every day to bring us this luxury, you know, or how they advertise it to us. It's like, oh, the luxury of like how we have it, but you know, meanwhile, like someone's hands are bleeding, as they, you know, like basically try and feed their family.
And the other thing is, like, you think about chocolate. Chocolate is like a multi-billion-dollar pound industry, and some of the biggest corporations are going to be Kraft or Cadbury's. And the thing is that they can't make chocolate unless getting cocoa. So really and truly, the places that produce cocoa should also be rich as well. So, but is Ghana rich? Is Ivory Coast rich? Not really. So then the question is, well, why not? What has happened there in the past or present to make those countries that produce this wealth so poor?
And that is why, you know, and I think you just knocked it on the head in terms of why history is important, because it's influencing the now. It's like, why is this situation still the case? And it is for the younger generations to make those observations and ask the question of our morality and our values, and especially when, you know, they're constantly told through the systems that they, you know, participate in that they're supposed to behave in certain ways, yet in the bigger picture and the paradigm of the world, it's like, well, hypocrisy here, here and here. Why should I be a decent citizen of the world? And it's a fair question. So yeah, if we could see that the coffee houses of the slave trade, the part 2 about the triangular trade, very interesting.
Just like today, back in the 1700s, the busiest trading areas of most British cities also had a high proportion of coffee houses. But the growth and popularity of coffee coincided with one of the darkest episodes in Britain's history.
This is a Jamaica wine house, but it used to be called the Jamaica Coffee House. At one time, coffee houses were very popular across the entire country, and people would go there to do business. They go there to invest in coffee, they go there to invest in sugar, they go to invest in people, and that's where they conduct their business. The question to ask yourself is, in your local area, are there any street names or buildings that have an African or Caribbean connection as far as their name's concerned?
Around the financial or market areas of any town or city, you might still find evidence of those early coffee houses.
This is evidence of one in London. It's called Lloyd's Coffee House. There's many connections between Lloyd's Coffee House and African history. Lloyd's Coffee House used to be the headquarters for what is now Lloyd's of London, a massive insurance company. But Lloyd's of London began insuring slave ships.
With the growth and popularity of coffee houses, there also came a demand for sugar and tobacco, and the British economic power base came to rely on the triangular trade. The triangular trade was made up of 3 journeys: the outward passage from Europe to Africa carrying manufactured goods, the middle passage from Africa carrying African captives who would be forced to work as slaves on the coffee and sugar plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas, and the final journey from the British-owned plantations in the Caribbean and the Americas, sending coffee, sugar and tobacco back home.
I'm here in the Docklands here of London. This particular dock is called the West India Dock, and it was built to handle a trade that came from the West Indies. The trade involved things like sugar, coffee, tobacco, and many other tropical products that helped to make Britain rich using African labour.
Docklands, rivers or canals are often rich hunting grounds for evidence of trading connections with Africa and the Caribbean.
That's awesome. So again, it's like I definitely have seen these signs and everything, and but you know, why is there no kind of homage to any of our contributions? In the sense, I mean, you can go and find it if you know, like you've been telling people. But
I think that some of the people involved are quite ashamed of their history or their past, because, for example, you think about Lloyd's of London, massive insurance corporation that began insuring slave ships. That is a fact. It's the truth. It's there in the records. But if you go to Lloyd's website, there's no reference to it. They talk about how they're involved in the sugar trade. So there's no so even though they're directly involved in insuring slave ships, that's what their business was. They talk about on their website how they got started in the sugar industry. So it's disguised. All of the kind of things which made them rich are kind of disguised with this language of sugar as opposed to slavery. And when let's think about tobacco, for example. So you think about how much money is the tobacco industry worth? Just off the top of your head, it's like billions of dollars or pounds or whatever it is. And at the root of that tobacco is the plantations in North and South America. In like Virginia, you had all the African people working on those tobacco plantations all day long for no money, and that's what built up that wealth. So I suppose for them to actually admit to that might be a bit embarrassing, and also might lead to people saying, well, listen, where's my reparations? Because you profited from my labor or my ancestors' labor for like 200 years or whatever. Where's my reparations? Because that's where you got all your money from.
Right. And then we jump to the fact, if we talking about Lloyd, and I'm sure a lot of the other banks being involved in some way in slavery, our participation in like doing business with them as people of color, but just people of moral standing, whoever we are, like isn't it questionable that we should even be, shouldn't they just be shut down? Well,
it is, and this is the other thing, because if you walk down the street in London, you see all these banks, Lloyds, Barclays, whatever, you see them everywhere. And one of the things I raise is that, well, you don't have to go back 200 years to talk about slavery and how Lloyds or whichever bank it was involved in some sort of fairly dodgy investments, because you can go to apartheid South Africa in the 1990s, 80s, whatever, or 80s, 90s,
in the 1990s.
Yeah, 1980s, before Mandela became president. Because when Mandela was in prison, he was saying to various, all international companies, do not invest in my country because they use that money to abuse us. So
they don't invest in
my country. Don't put money into South Africa. Because the money that you invest in this country has been used to oppress us and abuse us. And guess which corporations were doing that? It was Lloyds Bank, Barclays Bank, General Motors, all the big corporations, were doing that, and they were making money because they could actually pay black people far less money than white people. So you don't have to go back hundreds of years to find this unfair kind of investment process. This is a recent history. And that's another argument again for reparations, because when South Africa became, let's say Mandela was elected in 1994, which he was, and everything was equal then, which he wasn't, right? What reparations did the African people who'd been suffering for apartheid for 50 odd years get? They got no reparations at all. But those companies actually got more money after apartheid came to an end. So again, that's another an issue which I raise with people when they come to walk, because the history is literally right in your face. It's not in a long time ago at all.
So what type of people do these walks, and does it have any type of global appeal, or do you find it, what's the what's the word?
Demographics.
Demographic. I was going to say geographic. What's the demographic?
We get a lot of women on the walks, and they bring their kids most of the time. So we get a lot of them, something like 80%, 70%, 78% is female, black females. Then more recently, we actually get a few schools, primary schools, secondary schools from the London area. And then sometimes we'll get staff groups, so people who work for different government organizations or different companies will actually come on the walk as a kind of a bonding experience or a fun day out.
Yeah.
Which is, because it's quite a fun event. It's not like doom and gloom. It's quite interesting and engaging. But more recently, in the last couple of years or so, we had a lot more interest from American universities who are doing what they call a study abroad tour. And they're doing politics or economics or religion or gender studies or empire studies, and they'll use the war as a way of informing the students about that particular aspect of their coursework. So that's been an increase recently, I found.
And that's cool as well, to think that people are snapping pictures around London of an African history that they may never have known anything about otherwise. And so what and when you're, is your audience really young people in a sense of them understanding who they are to form who they are, or are you finding that it's a story for all of us?
It's a story for all of us. Like I say, if you talk about coffee, sugar, tea, cocoa, mahogany, all those products are connected to Africa. So if you just wake up in the morning and you have your cornflakes and some sugar on the top, you have some honey, if you have a vanilla chocolate bar or whatever, that is all black history as well. So it's for anyone who consumes those items, because it's literally in your face, on your breakfast table, in your house.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah. Exactly. And okay, so you have, so it's the walks, it's the talks, and it's the film.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the program that you have happening at the moment, especially obviously for people that are in the UK watching as well. We've
got a couple of events coming up at the Imperial War Museum. One is titled "How Black People Won World War II." And that's all about the black population, the African presence in World War II, because in America, I think you guys know about the Red Tails and know about all of the black troops who were in World War II. I think you guys know. But in England, a lot of us do have no idea there are any black people involved in World War II. So we have a 2-hour-long presentation which looks at the contribution of various African countries, various Caribbean countries, and shows how, without the African contribution, that Britain would not have been able to win World War II. I'll give you one example of what I'm talking about. Trinidad has lots of oil, and during World War II, England was getting its oil from Trinidad. So Trinidad even now has oil, but during World War II, you had convoys of American ships that would actually leave America, go to Trinidad, pick up the oil, take the oil to England, and then distribute to the various ships and tanks and fighter planes to help them to fight the war. Without that oil, and that's just one part of it, because I could also talk about the hundreds of thousands of black troops who were involved in World War II. And I'm not just talking about England, I'm talking about France as well, because most of France's fighting was done, at least in France itself, by African troops. So they actually used African troops to fight their way from the south coast of France, from North Africa. They invaded the south coast of France right to Paris, and when they got to Paris, they told all the black troops to get to the back of the queue, back of the march rather, and then when they filmed the march into Paris, they saw all the white troops. So you had something like a 2/3 African fighting force in France, fighting for France to help them win the war.
2/3 were African.
More or less, roughly 2/3, depending on what.
And they led the way. You know, they died first as
they got to the back of the queue when it came to actually entering Paris. So
for the photo opportunity.
Yeah.
Basically.
So when people watch those newsreels now, they see a whole bunch of white guys who kind of saved the day, but actually it was a whole bunch of black guys, at least French black guys, who saved the day as far as France was concerned. So we go through all these kind of issues from different parts of the empire and different parts of the world to show that there's this massive black presence that people don't know anything about. And that's just one thing. Other thing we have coming up is something called Cancer, Psychology and Media. And we're looking at what black women, 10 things black women need to know about cancer. So we're looking at cancer from a black woman's perspective, because if you think about breast cancer, for example, you find that black women are affected at an early age and have a different type of cancerous activity. So we have a woman who's an expert in that, and she's going to be talking about that. Then
and we have a lecture and a talk that people can come to.
That's part of the Queen and Zinga lecture. So we set up this lecture series called the Queen and Zinga lecture series, which showcases the talents of black female academics or black women who have expert knowledge. So every month or so, we have like a lecture theatre for 200 people, and we'll have a black woman who is an expert in a particular area, who is a doctor, and she will speak about her area of expertise. So that's coming up in the next month or so. Okay,
cool. So I can see how it all links together. Now, you know, with the films, you know, that you have all these different things. You know, the walks are one thing, the talks, and then the films, and all of it has this creative expression, and obviously all has a theme of, you know, our black existence and how that kind of influences, you know, everything else. You know, what's the connection really with America or African Americans in America, and, you know, forging that link to make us more connected? And also then with Africa and the connections that you've made with the filmmakers there, especially, like, you know, with the animation and the, you know, this idea of identity and seeing images that represent who we are. How do we, you know, create our own world, if you like, of, you know, maybe what I would call black cinema, where, you know, these conversations are happening more often because there's more people like you, you know, championing, bringing these works together, so people have an opportunity to see them if, like, the mainstream doesn't decide to make them a box office hit.
So the question is about how do we get more black films, more black history into the mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, into our stream. I mean, perhaps not. I mean, so perhaps it's like about us. How do we create our own flow? Like, what? I mean, is it even possible to create our own flow? I mean, our own mainstream. I mean, there is the mainstream, obviously, but I mean, I have this kind of, you know, maybe it's like a bit out there, but this idea that, you know, we can have our own, you know, mainstream, if you like, or our own flow, which services, you know, the films that we want to see and connects us to all of the people in the diaspora and, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose this channel is an example of creating our own mainstream, because people are watching this and they're finding out about what I'm doing in England, and what I'm doing in England is also about making international connections. So when we show films from Brazil, from any of the African continent countries, from America, from the Caribbean, from any place in the world where there's kind of any African presence. So that in itself opens people's mind. And when we have presentations, we will bring people in from those countries, from the diverse countries, and we'll have topics which relate to people from, you know, from any kind of background. So the one on cancer media, that's international. I mean, I could actually have, in fact, I could actually try and do that. Actually, I could bring those speakers over here and put it on here. And actually, we just, I just spoke to a guy called Renuka Rashidi.
Yes, Renuka Rashidi.
Right, so we're actually teaming up with him to do a Black History tour in London with a group he's bringing over from America. And that's something that we're going to be doing more and more of, that will be linking into various cultural institutions here, so that when they come to London, that they just kind of pick up a phone or email us, and then we put on something for them, and vice versa. So that's the sort of thing that we'd be looking for. And also, the other thing we're doing is like trying to link up using the internet. So what we tend to do what we hoped in the future. That's
why you can speak slow. It's okay.
Yeah, what we have a few minutes left. Is to have, like, let's say like this is going on, we can have a live stream network to your this presentation, or if there's a presentation by one of your guys here in New York, we can link it up to our audience in London, because there's people in London who would love to hear what's going on here, and I think maybe vice versa. If people even know there's stuff happening in London from a Black perspective, they might want to know too.
I think so, definitely. And I think, you know, this just, again, is one step to opening that up, and especially the conversations when I have with people, they're like, what, there's more than just you from there? Like, but you know, if you think about it, if you only get the BBC, you might have seen EastEnders or Coronation Street or whatever they might have brought over. Like, you know, you'd be like, oh, there isn't really any Black folk there, you know, whatever. But okay, so just there's the last piece that I want to show, because actually it's all about economics, isn't it, as well? Like when you were just discussing that with this connection with Renuka
Rashidi.
Rashidi. You know, and it's all about, you know, forming that, you know, that economic connection as well. And so the last piece that we're going to show is about gold, and I think again that's a very interesting you know, concept when we think about gold and where it's from and like who owns it all now. So if we can show that piece, that would be great. Gold with Tony Warner. Have we got it there?
Most of Britain's towns and cities have a trading or financial area. I'm here in one of the most powerful financial districts in the world. This part of London is known as the City of London, and it's interesting that here in this great trading epicenter there's rich evidence of Black history.
I'm in the Bank of England, one of the most important banks in Britain. This bank was set up in 1694. Before that time, money was controlled by the goldsmiths. They'd make items from gold, they'd even lend money to the king. But where was all this gold coming from?
I'm holding a real solid gold bar. It's incredibly heavy. Some of Britain's earliest trading power came from a wealth of gold extracted from Africa. In 1325, Timbuktu in Mali was one of the biggest centers of trade in the world. The markets there brought in merchants from Nigeria, Egypt, Venice and Genoa, where they traded manufactured goods for gold. Timbuktu was ruled by the generous African king of Mali, Mansa Musa. He was richer than all the kings of Europe and was probably the richest man in the world at the time. One of the first British mass-produced gold coins takes its name from the region of West Africa where much of the gold used to make the coin originated.
Well, in 1663 a new coin was introduced. It was gold, originally intended to be valued at £1. The gold in it was just below the face value of the coin. But the value of gold was fluctuating so wildly at that time that the value of this coin actually went as high as 30 shillings, that's £1.50 in today's money, and it was called a guinea because the gold came from the Guinea coast of Africa. It originated from there. And this gold then came back to Britain and it drove the economy of Britain, or helped to drive it. It wasn't the only force, I mean, there were other factors, but it was a major force. In times of crisis, people always want gold.
Yeah,
If you look back at history, every time there's been a war, price of gold has gone up.
And I have to say that was really cool, because every corner, like when you, especially through Bed-Stuy, that you just see, you know, we buy gold, and like they're buying up all the gold in the world, and I really feel like, okay, there's something here about the gold. I know, but whether it's the alchemy or, you know, whether it's the, you know, if you believe in the Anunnaki, whatever it is, everyone wants the gold. So, you know, this idea of, you know, it came from Africa, and yet again,
I mean, it's like, it speaks for itself. If you can imagine that the Bank of England was getting so much gold from Africa that when they made it, because in America you have dollars, that's, you know, you call your unit of currency dollars. I don't know why, but you call it dollars. So in England, they were getting so much gold from this African country called Guinea that they thought, let's just call the money we produce here the Guinea, because the gold to make that money comes from Africa. That's how much black history there is, and that's the Bank of England. Might as well call it the Bank of Africa, because that's where the money is coming from. I mean, that's how blatant the black history is, that you have this is the Bank of England saying that we're getting our money from Africa, so we just call it after the African country's name. It's like, what do I need to say anymore? That's how much black history is in England. Loads of it.
and yet, you know, the £5 that I have, it's like an IOU to the bank, and if I try to go and get my money's worth in gold, where is it?
You'd be waiting.
Okay, so this has been Ancestor House. It's so good to have you on. Please tell everybody, please tell everybody just, you know, just quickly as we wrap up, where they can find you.
You can find us on blackhistorywalks.co.uk, or just Google Black History Walks Facebook page, or Black History Walks on Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com//Black History Walks.
Black History Walks. Okay, so Black History Walks, just Google it. It's all over the internet. You can see these videos again and everything and enjoy.
And we have a great newsletter that comes out every month that tells you all the stuff that's happening around the world and what things you can get involved in.
So people can sign up for that
on the website.
On the website. So go to the website. This has been Ancestor House. My name is Dami Akinnusi. You can find me all over social media as well. So stay connected. Thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you next week. This has been Tony Warner from the UK. That's right, from London, my hometown, from Director of Black History Walks. See you next time. Thanks for joining us. Cool. That was awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. Tony in New York. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Tony in New York. That's so cool. I'm so glad you were able to like come on the show. Wow.
I'm so glad we are family. I want to shout, we are family, and tell the world we are family, and show the world we are family. Take my hand, brother, we are family. You help me, I'll help you stand. We are family. It's a gift from God.